The Oasis Townsville is the home base for the veteran community. Our community centre is a place where veterans, along with their families and friends, can gather to engage in activities of mutual interest, seek guidance from the team on integrating into the Townsville community, or simply unwind with a coffee from Dirty Boots Cafe. Introducing Homebase, a compelling podcast series by the Oasis Townsville and sponsored by Rotary Mudingborough, which delves into the inspiring stories of veterans and their families as they navigate life after service. Hosted by Steve and Angie, this podcast sheds light on the challenges faced during transition and the remarkable ways in which guests have found purpose in civilian life. Through personal narratives and candid conversations, Homebase offers valuable insights, support, and hope for those embarking on a similar journey. Join us as we explore resilience, determination, and triumph in the face of adversity. Angie is the executive leader of the Oasis Townsville and commenced in April 2021. Angie has 25 years experience working in the community mainstream sector and over 20 years experience in leadership roles. Angie is very passionate about helping people and making a difference. Angie feels very privileged to be leading the Oasis Townsville and changing lives of the veteran community. Steve is a part of the service delivery team and served in the Air Force for 10 years and has experience working in community services. Steve's motivation sits with helping veterans and their families find their place and purpose in the civilian world, while also sharing stories of those who have lived the transition process via the podcast Homebase. Steve loves talking sport, and if you can beat him at table tennis, he'll shout you a coffee. In this episode, we have a conversation with former Australian Army pilot Mathew Frost, who brings a wealth of experience with over 2,000 hours of flying time in helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. Matt reflects on the peaks and valleys of his Army career, sharing how a defining experience during an audition for Ninja Warrior shaped his direction after leaving the service. Join us as we explore his compelling journey and the meaningful impact it has had on his life.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Great to have you on, mate. Take us back to when you joined the Army.
Yeah, g'day. So I joined in 2003. I was 22 and I was working, a dead-end job. I was out on a building site putting in surveyor's pegs. 2 jets flew past and the guy that I was working with sort of pointed and went, well, and he was familiar with my situation, sort of not really enjoying my job and what have you. And he said, why don't you do that? And I said, I'm not smart enough. And he looked at me like I was the biggest idiot he's ever met and convinced me to have a go. And I couldn't think of a reason not to. So I went home and called recruiting, told them that I was coming in to get an application to be a pilot, and they kind of laughed. But then I remember getting the application, no problem, after an interview, and then went to flight screening, passed all the medical tests, passed the physical assessments and that kind of stuff. It wasn't long after when I got a call from the Army and they said, do you want to fly helicopters? I accepted straight away. And then, I think it was like less than a week later, I'd signed on the line and I was heading down to officer training at Duntroon. It all happened pretty quick, I guess. It was only a couple of months, but I couldn't believe that was going to happen. It was really exciting. Yeah, so I went through all the training. I did basic flight training at Tamworth, 120 hours in a fixed wing. I wasn't great at fixed wing flying. I was pretty good at navigation though, which was kind of, thank God, because we didn't do a lot of aerobatics in helicopters later on. We did a lot of low-level navigation, so I was already doing pretty well in that. And I did get the ground school prize for my academic performance there, which was pretty cool. For whatever reason, my testing stuff was really terrible. So, during normal development sorties, I'd be getting, pretty good marks. My preparation was fine and performance was good. And then I'd come to a test and I'd scrape through like by the thinnest of margins. And I remember many instructors looking at me during a test like, what is this guy doing? He's having an absolute shocker. But it was good enough. Thankfully, I'd done it okay in the other sorties and that had sort of carried me through. Then I went to helo school when that was at Okie. By this time, it was 2004. And I did pretty well there. There was a couple of areas where I struggled, but it was low-level navigation. I was flying helicopters. I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. I realised then that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the fight. I wanted to be telling people where bullets were coming from. I wanted to be calling in artillery. I wanted to be finding the bad guys. That really, I guess, solidified my career direction when I started learning the helicopter tactics. By 2005, I was in Darwin, serving in 161 Reconnaissance Squadron as a junior pilot, a DCAT, one of the lowest category. One of the first guys that I flew with, he was my aircraft captain and I was his stick monkey, I guess, his co-pilot, was Outback Mike. You might remember him from TV series Alone. He's a solo adventurer, total crazy badass actually, and a really nice guy. He was one of the best guys I ever flew with. Within a few sorties of flying with him, I'm like, I want to be like this guy. He just had this most amazing brain space. His three-dimensional picture in his head that he was able to maintain was incredible. He knew where the jets were, where the enemy was, where the friendlies were, where the other aircraft was. He knew how much time, how much fuel. Like, he just knew everything off the top of his head. How he did it, I'll never know. And I'm like, I want to be like this guy. Unfortunately, I was not the best student. I thought I'd already, I'd conquered the flight training part of it, and I really didn't know how to fit in with the squadron. It was really challenging. It felt like I was back in high school being the social outcast again, and I could never figure out why. And that left me on the out for all sorts of things, and I never really got the hang of the type of feedback that I was getting. It made improving very difficult. I never really knew what I needed to get better at or how to get better at it. Throwaway things like, you need to get back in the books. Okay, which of the 15 books do I need to read and which part of it, and how do I apply that in real life? It would have been really helpful information. I still had a picture of what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the guy with the big brain who everybody wanted to fly with and who knew all of the things. So I just kind of went about it my own way. Eventually I got a really good OC who saw my potential. He gave me a few extra responsibilities, and eventually I made it to become a check captain. And a check captain is like a guy who assesses other people, not necessarily trains them, but just kind of checks that they're up to the standard, much like a flight instructor would in the testing phase. That was really beneficial. That really kind of helped me understand the whole feedback process, and it was one step closer to being the guy. By then I was pretty good at reconnaissance. I'd done 2 tours of service in East Timor, flying reconnaissance and, helping identify problems over there. And I felt like I had a pretty good handle on the aircraft. I could really understand, I could feel the problems with it. I was a test pilot as well, a maintenance test pilot, and I had a good understanding of everything in the aircraft. And then came another change. I did a short stint in Germany flying EC-135s with the German Army as a transition into the ARH Tiger, which was Australia's new reconnaissance and attack helicopter. I went through training on the Tiger as maybe the second Australian groups of 6 they were doing at the time. I was in there with my future CO, 2 instructors, a maintenance test pilot, like a bunch of other dudes as well. So we were all pretty experienced, and we were trying to build up the base of knowledge for this new aircraft. So 2009, I turned back up to Darwin, qualified in Tiger, and I was, overweight and unhappy because I just spent 6 months training where you kind of concentrate on study and not anything else. And I was feeling pretty miserable about stuff. I had a pretty good direction. I was an aircraft captain for some of the sorties. Within sort of a year, I was an aircraft captain full-time, and I was doing lots of maintenance test flight, which was fantastic for your development and understanding the aircraft. And that would be the same for basically the rest of my career. Doing maintenance test pilot stuff was fantastic for that. Eventually, the Army heard me crying out loud that I wanted to be an instructor, and they agreed that I could go and do my instructor qualification and then come straight back to the regiment. Normally, instructors spend a lot of time in the school, which is in Oki, sort of live a very kind of bland existence down there doing daily sorties, which was not what I wanted to do. In my mind, I still wanted to be that guy who was at the front line teaching these young guys how to do reconnaissance, how to fire rockets, how to do all of the cool war fighting stuff. I couldn't get it out of my mind. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the first rotation to go anywhere. For many years there, we were training to go to Afghanistan to support our guys on the ground, and I wanted to be on that first plane so bad. We ignored a lot of problems with our aircraft and system just to make that happen, to the point of probably, ill-considered decisions at some point. But I got back to the regiment, and I lasted a couple of months. In that time, looking back on it now, I realised that I'd burnt myself out. Any number of contributing factors were to blame. I guess the biggest one for myself was that I had a lack of awareness of what was actually happening. I'd been putting aside or ignoring, my own needs, my personal development, and just forging ahead with becoming the guy who knew everything and putting every effort that I could into being that guy at work. Military service has a way of extracting a toll on you whether you want to pay it or not. Yeah. And I was not aware that I was paying this toll until it was too late. Up until that point, I'd had 8 pretty serious incidents in the aircraft where the aircraft had been trying to well, I say the aircraft had been trying to kill me, but it's a bit hard on the aircraft. We'd been having incidents where I'd been inhaling fumes in the cockpit, and that was really bad for your health, both immediately and long term. And I was on an instructional flight with the guy. We were just supposed to go out and have fun. He was a bit of an underperformer. We were trying to, build his confidence. I remember thinking back to the way I was when I was a junior pilot, and I'm like, okay, this is a chance to kind of pay back and be better than the guidance that I'd had. And we had a fumes incident. We had to land immediately. He couldn't handle the landing. And I remember getting out of that aircraft and just wanting to burn it to the ground. And I could not figure out why I felt so angry. And I went to my CEO and I'm like, sir, I don't think I can do this anymore. And of course he was kind of, both curious and upset that he just put someone through, instructor training, was losing an instructor, and here he was saying he couldn't do it. And I felt the same way. I felt like I'd let everybody down. Here I was finally in a position to be the guy. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out why I didn't want to do it. That was when I realised that no matter how much I loved my job, that probably wasn't going to love me back, at least not in the way that was meaningful or rewarding.
Was this where your transition began, Matt?
Yeah, basically, that was 2015. And we ended up on the news. We were posted all over Facebook as, problems with the Tiger helicopter continue, something like that, and those headlines. And my CEO, thankfully, had this was the same CEO who had placed trust in me years before. He was an OC back then, and he was now my CEO. He's like, look, I'll support you anywhere you need to go. So I elected to come to Townsville to fly Chinooks. I felt like I had something in me to give, and I loved flying. I'm like, how bad could it be? So I came down here and did a desk job for a little while, tried to inject a bit of rigor into the training process, develop schedules and training processes and that kind of thing, all of the good things that I saw out of the regiment from One Avon. And I was met with a lot of resistance, and that made it quite difficult. And at the same time, I was burning myself out. I think I came down with shingles twice during this period because I was just working, throwing everything I could at this job, trying to, I guess by then I'd lost that image that I was the guy, because here I was going to be a junior guy again. The things that I knew, nobody was really paying attention to as well. So I was really, really struggling. And I felt perhaps a bit like a financial conscript by then as well. Like I had this huge pay packet. I was at the top pay for a captain. And what does somebody do after they get out of the army and become a civilian? I had no idea. That was really, really scary. I had no idea. I had a mortgage to pay and all the rest of the normal bills. So I felt like just crack on. Surely it can't be too bad. I'm almost at 20 years. Let's take the retention and maybe that'll help. And kind of just egged myself on, which looking back at it now was a terrible idea, but of course you don't know that, do you?
No.
And because I wasn't really succeeding very much, I guess I certainly felt like I wasn't succeeding in my career, I put a lot of effort into my side quests or my personal development. I started running marathons. I did 3 marathons in 3 days as my very first marathon event, which if you're considering it, it's a great event, but do not do it as your first event. It's terrible. It's literally 3 marathons in 3 days, and by the second day, it's pretty challenging. Anyway, I did that, and I'd started training for Ninja Warrior on TV, and I was already fit. I think I'd figured out how to do okay at it. I had a plan and I'd been training quite hard. And this was basically at the same time that I was training my final phase in Chinooks. So I was flying during the day, doing the odd sortie, and then coming home and, running 10Ks and doing endless push-ups and chin-ups and, training my grip strength. It was pretty insane. I felt like if I just tried harder, maybe things would work out. In August of that year, 2017, I snapped my Achilles doing some training for Ninja Warrior. Like I'd gotten the call, you're coming down to Brisbane, we're going to do the thing, put some effort into your training, and then we'll see you on Sunday. And it was like Wednesday, and I snapped my Achilles. And it was a decent job. I ended up being in a cast and on crutches for 6 months, in a moon boot for a bit longer. It took ages to get fit again. By then, I was an absolute mess. I was hopelessly depressed. I was, I'm going to say, borderline addicted to painkillers, although in the reality, man, I was really, really, really enjoyed that warm, fuzzy feeling you got from endone. It was pretty terrible. And looking back on that time in my life, it feels like such a waste. It does sort of throw into sharp relief the people who will support you and the love that I had for my family. That was a good takeaway from that. It was a hard come down. And the mountain that I had to climb after that time, and I was still planning to go back to flying. I had to do a capability test in the aircraft, and I still had real bad weakness in my ankle and my calf muscle, my Achilles in general. climbing up top of the aircraft and trying to get in and out of the aircraft and, do pre-flight servicing and that kind of thing. I was assessed on all of those things and I managed to somehow fake my way through that. I was clearly not in any condition to climb on top of an aircraft, but the guy testing me was kind of like, yeah, okay, that looked fine. And so I wanted to get back in, but then by then I'd realised that I had to relearn the flight manual and the standards manual and all of the rules and all of the stuff that I'd forgotten. And I just did not have the motivation anymore. It was like the desire to fly had just been burnt clean out of me. Like I just couldn't think of doing anything remotely close to flying. The whole idea was just terrible.
Was there a point where you realised you needed to seek some help and have a chat with somebody?
Yeah, I was actually sitting in an office with a therapist and she looked at me and went, "You're not okay." And I broke down. I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm not." And it had been a couple of weeks, probably a couple of months, and I'd been riding to and from work on my bike to be fit, and I was thinking about riding it into traffic and how good would that be? And then all of a sudden I'd be home and I'm like, "Oh, I missed my chance. It's all right. I'll do it tomorrow." And that had just become a normal way of thinking for me, which is crazy to think about now, right? And I had all of these fantastic plans and the most spectacular suicide you could ever think of. And I'm like, what? Why do I have to be the best at everything, including suicide? This is insane. And my therapist, God, I could hug that woman. she really, really helped. She helped me get in touch with what the hell was going on. And clearly I was not in the right space. So the worst thing ever happened. I was grounded. So here I was. I didn't want to fly, but now I've got the army telling me that I can't fly because I'm suicidal. And you take flying away from a pilot and you're left with a very sad man. Yeah. That was a pretty low point. It was the first time that I was really introduced seriously to therapy and personal development on the level that I needed. Personal development up until then had been like just getting better at stuff, right? Like running faster and getting stronger in the gym and all of those things. It wasn't being in touch with feelings and developing empathy and, any of that. That was not necessary in my career. And it was the first time I realised that had been the cost of my high performance in these other areas. I just ignored it or it wasn't necessary, so I had concluded that I would not do it. It did not make me better at shooting the bad guy, therefore it wasn't necessary. That was a lesson that I'd learned in 2011. I went on a deployment to the US where we had watched the UK Apache Squadron get ready for Operation Herrick, which was their mission in Afghanistan. So they were flying Apaches, which is a very sort of similar capability to what we had in the ARH. I remember watching several of their debriefs and their lead instructor was just the most laser-focused man I've ever met. He features in several stories about the Apache, if you've read any of those books about the Apaches in Afghanistan. He didn't iron his uniform because ironing your uniform doesn't mean you can kill the enemy better. Like, that's how focused he was. He was just incredible. And I'd taken that lesson to heart and it had come back to bite me, I guess, basically. Being better at something that you care about but not acknowledging what it costs you is a double-edged sword, I think.
So you're in the big bad civvy world. What changed your focus? What was your purpose? What became of you after all that you'd been through? So,
yeah, during this time, I've been sort of struggling at work and I was on and off work and doing half days and that kind of thing. And I was the whole plan was to get back to flying, but that really wasn't going to happen. Looking back on it now, it was terrible. Thankfully, I had there was a medical officer who I shared an office with occasionally, and he came in and took one look at me and went, "You're not okay, and I think you should transition because this is not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen." He helped me sort of realise that hanging around was not healthy either. I needed to make a clean break, much like breaking up with your ex. All of a sudden, they don't look as attractive once you separated, and just limping along was not good. So my new focus became my kids and my family and being the best dad I could possibly be, because I knew that I was already pretty good at that stuff, and here was a chance for me to be actually pretty good at it. So I took some medical leave, and then the whole transition process started with thanks to this medical officer at work. It was a really great time. I got to spend heaps of time with my kids. I was taking them to school, doing all the lunch runs and all that kind of stuff. It was awesome. That time was sort of a bit bittersweet, because here was the slow demise of my career, where I had become the guy and lost it, and but now I could become the best dad. That certainly gave me renewed purpose, and I've got a tattoo that sort of celebrates that a little bit as well. Cool. Ironically, it's written in Latin so that nobody can understand it, but that just means that everybody asks what it means. Yeah. So I have to explain it every single time. Nice. Yeah. Separation did drag out for quite a while. There was COVID. I had a whole bunch of surgeries I needed to do. I had shoulders, 2 knees. My Achilles needed review again. So I was a bit of a mess there for about a year. Throughout that time, I focused on my kids. That really gave me that drive to succeed. Like, I needed to get to be fit.
Yeah.
I needed my Achilles to work so that I could run after my kids and take them to the park and stuff. And there's really, I don't think, a greater motivator than that, not during a time like that.
No. And you got into bodybuilding, Matt.
Yeah. And if you told me a few years ago that I'd be a bodybuilder with gold medals, I would have laughed in your face. It started out as rehab, basically. My shoulder couldn't lift anything. And the doctor was like, hey, you need to go and do this rehab stuff. And I dragged myself to the exercise physio and was absolutely miserable that first session. I remember being just such an absolute prick to my poor physio. I was like, I don't understand why I'm here and this sucks, because you're going to get me to, lift a 1 kilo weight the wrong way. Well, 2 years later, I guess. And competed in my first bodybuilding competition last September. And it became just such a beautiful way of celebrating not only my recovery, but also, dealing with your demons, like in your own little private headspace in the gym. There's guys there, and girls who are positive and there for their own well-being. So you're surrounded with this beautiful sort of group of people who share each other's successes, which is just wonderful. Again, it worked towards my purpose of being fit and healthy for my family, which is very motivational. What a way to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. What an incredible journey, Matt. We are asking all our guests this question. What would you tell your younger self?
Yeah, I've given this a bit of thought, and the best I could come up with was grow into the mentor you wish you had. And I think that sort of really sums up my journey of, recognising the talents of others and then realising what kind of feedback you need to be better, and then becoming that person, providing that feedback. I always used to really kind of get a bit frustrated that I wasn't told directly what I was doing wrong and how to fix it. So when I became the instructor, when I became the guy in ARH, I was like, man, you need to read this section and this chapter, and you need to concentrate on applying that in this particular way and give really clear guidance. Not only for, technical stuff, but also just in general. And as soon as I realized that I was doing that, I stopped and paused, and I actually started getting coaching in all the other areas of my life as well, because it made me realize, like, hey, I don't need to do this alone. There are actually experts out there. Let's go and find the expert, become better at it, and then you can provide that information to others once you're the expert yourself. So that pretty much sums up my journey.
Awesome. Ties in nice. Mate, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's been great chat.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Homebase podcast, sponsored by Rotary Mundingborough. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and gained valuable insights. If you'd like to explore more episodes and stay updated on future releases, visit theoasistownsville.org.au. There, you can find all our Homebase podcasts covering a range of topics related to community, empowerment, and personal growth.